Your friends, your friends. Radio friends again. Radio friends again. We've got a lot to share.
Oh, God. You know, it's funny. We get on the Zoom probably about 10 minutes ago. Until I figure out how to use my computer, we do all kinds of stuff. You know, in fact, Pell wasn't even dressed yet, but he looked really good, even at his age. You know, he really, really looked good. Just he wasn't wearing any pants, so we made him square up his camera a little bit. Welcome to the 23rd of August. This Radio Friends again, and it's great to still have everybody come back after a reunion. It was just beyond belief, and still some of you decided to come back on Friday. But beautiful day, sun is out, and we got a nice group of folks right here. Let's go around the room. Say good morning to Tracy Carmen.
Good morning, Steve, from beautiful Longmeadow, Mass.
And John Landry is here from Marlboro. Nope, East Hampton.
No, East Hampton on
Well,
Lake
that's funny.
Freeport.
I
Good
didn't know
morning.
that you guys actually had two houses next door to each other, right on the town line. That's really interesting. I was like, wait a minute. And let's see, we have there's Bob. Oh, Bob Marks is here.
Good morning, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you again. I missed last week, and I'm sorry. And I also missed Sunday getting together with you guys. I wish I could have done that. Of course, I have great love for my broadcast brothers, especially my Big D brothers. And I'm here in beautiful Vero Beach, where it's been rainy, but it's still beautiful.
Marks wasn't there at the reunion? I thought I saw him go by twice. Well, that's what happens. You know, you never have to worry about saying you weren't there because we all think that you're there anyways. And Bob Craig is here.
I'm there in spirit,
Bob Craig is here from Philly. Hi, Bob.
Yes, good morning. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. Oh, what a glorious feeling. Everything's going my way.
Can't you just say good morning, my children?
No, I gotta make it
one of those.
Wanted to quote Oscar Hammerstein. All right. Go ahead, proceed.
I like that. Hal is here. Morning, Hal.
Good morning. I'm continuing my extended visit to the Third Rock from the Sun here in Marlboro, Connecticut.
See, you guys are next door neighbors. And Dave Overson's here, still camping. If they let him back in the house, it's homeless Overson. Well, the home is behind you, but it's mobile. How you doing, Dave?
Good, Steve. Good, Steve. Yes, it's beautiful here in Countryside RV in Griswold, Connecticut. The sun is out. The temperature is perfect. And I'm getting more sun on this side than I should get a nice even balance.
Yeah.
But good morning, everybody.
Overson screwed up a really nice radio career by adding video to it. Okay, Ed Bruder is here. Good morning, Ed. How are you? The man from Mars we saw you at the reunion. You were having some fun.
Yeah, that was great.
Can't hear you, Ed. Well, maybe that's the best way. Ed, you're mute.
You're muted.
You're muted, Ed.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we had a good New Hampshire contingent at the reunion this weekend between the Bryant Michaud, Clark Smith, and I. We all came down.
Yeah.
Wow, it was great. Brian Thomas is here. Brian was having a great time. I saw him. You had a lampshade on, but it was really you still had your headphones, but it looked good.
Well, you know, it's these ears. I got to have headphones or I don't hear shit. You know, so.
Well, it was great that I guess Ron encouraged him to come along and visit whenever you can. And Ron is with us having breakfast. Good morning, Ron.
Eating my protein bar from Cheshire, Connecticut. Cheshire.
Yes.
Cheshire.
And Jim Harrington is here. Hi, Jim.
Hi, guys. Good to be here on another Friday with a bunch of talented people. Pardon?
Jim was actually parking cars at the reunion. Unfortunately, Jim didn't.
Yeah, I was washing cars at the reunion.
And Jim was the subject of some very nice Facebook remarks by Bob DiCarlo this week.
You know, he's a nice guy. What can I say? You know.
And I'm in Berlin, Connecticut.
You know how much that cost me? A few bucks, by the way.
yeah, and it's nice because you know Bob has been making some nice comments online, which is good. But yeah, it was really something. One of the things I just wanted to throw out there because we had such a great chat last week with Harvey Nagler. I guess what I'm kind of curious about is is there, let's say that there was some news radio out there, and I guess 1010 Wins will still do it. Do you think that people question radio news the same way they question the media with television news? I mean, I guess that's a question, and we always have that. No matter what slant you're on, left or right, that question. It seems on television we're getting further and further away from staying neutral and non-editorial, and it seems like
Steve, I think radio news is it's more succinct. It's packaged differently. It's made for shorter bursts. 20 minutes at a time. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. Yeah. That kind of thing. So I think they are more. You probably get more news and less opinion on the radio news. Just my humble opinion.
I think you're right. I think it's one of the things that WCBS did over a 60-year span was to train people to listen to the news rather than at it, and the rest of radio went the other way, and that's unfortunate. But this was one of the last bastions of good electronic journalism, and it's going to be sorely missed. Perry Urie said it best GM probably I ever worked for. He looked at me and Tom Barsanti and somebody else who was in the management team at TIC, and he said, "What are you going to do 30 years from now when WTIC is just another radio station?"
I mean, he wasn't totally wrong.
No, not at all.
And I may have been in that room. I spent my 2 years in management there, and it was. I thought you would say Bob Dunn was the best general manager you ever had, but we'll leave that alone for another day. I think the biggest difference.
Well, actually, they were birds of a feather. So
Well, I think Bob Dunn, for those who don't know, was Perry Urie. Perry Urie, you're right, was really one of the top guys. I mean, Perry knew how to run a radio station, and he knew how to make money, especially for the chasers who demanded that. But getting back to this whole thing, let's not forget, television is a national medium. Radio is a local medium.
That's right.
If you listen, I grew up with WCBS in New York. They'll give you the top of the hour headlines and all that stuff, but mostly it's local news and local features. Local radio, they do a great job with local features. Just, human interest stories, things like that, little vignettes. And of course, the most important thing in a radio station, and I think TIC will tell you this, or anybody who worked there, is the weather. Everybody wants the weather like all the time.
Yep.
And they do, and who does a better job than the Travelers Weather Service? I guess that's still around. I don't know. Steve, are they still doing that?
No. I mean, and actually, our news services changed. I think we do it as like the WTIC Weather Center, but it really has changed a lot. And I guess I still like what we do with our news department, and even when we do the Saturday morning show, which is by far when WTIC gets back to its roots, that's what we try to do. Keep it community based, but even with community based, remembering all the time that it has such a tremendous signal, even though Ron can't hear it in Cheshire. It has a strange pattern, but we've had, the streaming has gotten really huge as far as, the way people listen to it. I prefer it because it's always a clean signal. But I will say, keeping the issue broader than community. So that's the thing. Sometimes we'll talk about, what's happening in the local theater and all that kind of stuff, and even tiny community things. But subject matter, you always try to leave broad enough. That's why, that we always try to keep that in mind. So sometimes we'll say, well, we're doing this, but I say, okay, how does, if you're doing community theater, how does it affect everybody? Well, it's probably community theater in quite a few communities. So, but I'll tell you, it is sad. I always loved it. I have listened to CBS 880 for a long, long time. Yeah. And I'm really going to miss it. And even on television, I can't find anything. Does C-SPAN ever do anything other than watch over the news? Is there anything ever there? Is there any news at all on cable that isn't slanted left, right, or whatever?
I think one of the first hints of radio news diminishing is when people started to watch early morning television. and the various news and information programs. And of course, then back 70s, 80s, there were smaller TVs that people would put on their kitchen counter, which you didn't have back in the 60s necessarily. So the convenience factor, which radio has always been, it's been so convenient to listen to anything with a click of a switch, and there it was right there. But with television, it was a little bit cumbersome to get what you wanted. So when a lot of these morning news shows came on, and now they're as early as 4 a.m., 5 a.m., at least in Philly,
right.
they begin at 4
Yeah.
o'clock in the morning.
Here's
But they focus in on the local news, and it's there visually for you, as well as the weather, which is so detailed on television that you don't get on radio, or you can get detailed information on the weather if you go to a service like AccuWeather.com, especially on a very stormy day when you can bring up the radar screen and gauge how soon it will be when the rain or snow or ice or whatever is going to hit your area. So the visual factor of broadcasting comes into play much more than what we grew up with. A lot of
That's
respect
true.
for what you
Good
guys
point.
are talking about. Yeah, radio was there. It was
Right.
always there for you, and it was immediate, and you could get what you want pretty much when you wanted it. But that whole scene has changed. That was the first hint. And if you're up really early in the morning and you walk down your street and you see kitchen lights on, you'll see the flicker of a TV somewhere off in the distance.
One of the biggest stories that I remember about TIC AM, long before I even got there in 79, was hearing the pitch that they were making to move the transmitters from Avon Mountain down to the Connecticut River to get a better ground signal, better ground wave. And they hemmed and hawed, and probably it's going to cost millions of dollars. We can't do this. We got to fight with people along the way to get this approved for inland wetlands. And there was one excuse after another, but nothing ever became of that. And I was very disappointed, because if they had made that switch from the mountain, which was the world's worst place for an AM transmitter, down to the swamps of the Connecticut River, you would get the WFAN and WCBS type of propagation that TIC never could achieve, being parked on the hill in Avon. And I was so disappointed that nobody ever followed that to fruition. They kind of just gave up on it.
Well, it's interesting, Brian, and I just want to jump in there. I'm sorry to interrupt, because I actually spent about 3 hours this past week just talking and reminiscing with Arnold Chase. And he's getting the United Way is honoring for lifetime achievement. And we do a program once a month, the last Saturday, about with the United Way. And it's interesting because he was a DRC groupie. He played every contest at DRC.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I still always thought the world of my dad. And I mean, he said, Dave came home one day and said, "Hey, I bought WTIC, and here you go, have fun." But I mean, it was really, he is still the supreme geek, but what he has on that mountain had to exist in one form or another. They could have had a stick down by the water, and I agree, swamp would have been great for a signal. But what they have up there, the way it was put together, I guess, by travelers initially, it's there. I mean, Arnold's a big believer in doomsday. He really is. His house on the mountain is prepared for years.
Yeah.
But he has everything there. He doesn't talk about it because he says, number one, you don't talk about it. But I will say, if you go up to the top of that mountain, God forbid the world's going to end, there's a lot there. I mean, if you got to go underneath it or whatever, and I've never been in there, but I do understand from anybody who has, there's a lot more there than just a radio station. So maybe that had to exist one way or the other. We have everything set up there. If it all of a sudden it came to an end, open the door, plug in and go.
Yeah.
To Brian's point about the TIC signal and where their stick was located, a lot of that was avoided. The problem was avoided when cable started to really get hot in the late 70s. And cable brought their signal to places that you couldn't get it over the air.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now cable is feeling the same difficulties that over the air radio and television have suffered. Their audiences are starting to diminish. They're getting a lot of cord cutting. The cost has just gotten sky high. You got a million channels, but you don't want to watch any of them. So cable it was the savior of TV for a while. It extended life by probably 25 years, but now it's on the downhill slant.
Well, one of the things that was interesting about TIC and Bob Dunn and Perry Uri, when the station was under their tutelage, it really prospered. Anybody who was in town in a sales department knew exactly what was going on. And between the two stations, the AM and the FM, they had nearly 35% of the Connecticut radio audience between the two of them. 22 share on the AM, 15 or better share on the FM. And one of the things that Bob Dunn told me was, in the height of the revenue production, WTIC had $1 million months after they paid the bills.
Oh, that was very common. In 1990, WTIC AM did 7.5 million in revenue. WTIC FM did $5 million in revenue. Okay, what does that add to? That's, my math is right, that's $12.5 million.
Yeah.
The entire market, the entire Connecticut market did 25 million.
That's right.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Those two stations controlled 50% of the revenue in the market. And by the way, that wasn't good enough.
No.
Oh, no, it wasn't. And I remember when I sold there, if the AM if anybody ever got close to the AM billing, hell was going to be paid, because John Capuano would run those meetings and it would be stomping his fist saying, this cannot happen.
When I joined that station in 1990, and we were just about going into a pretty bad recession, if anybody remembers that back in those days, Bob Dunn came to me and they made me sales manager. And there was a woman named Cynthia, I forgot her name, but she wasn't really good. They got rid of her. They kicked her to the curb, and they said, look, we want you to take over the sales of the FM, but here's the deal. We have to get to over $5 million. We have to have $5 million in revenue, and I'll give you a bonus. And he structured a bonus program for me if you get us there. And I did. I got him there, and we had a great sales team. We had Amy Dupuis, Vicky Ward. I can go on and on. Great, Sir Pete Forrester. If anybody remembers Pete, yeah. His father was a legendary radio guy. And we did it. And that was 1990. 1991, the ratings went down a little. Revenue started to fall, and they burned a woman named Fran Shaw, Francine Shapiro.
Yeah.
She was no fun to work for Fran Shaw. No fun at all.
No, not at all.
She used to put out, she had two witch dolls, a happy witch and a sad witch. And if you go by her office and first thing in the morning and the sad witch was there, don't go in her office. That's how she ran the sales department. It was terrible, horrible. And then finally, I was able to get out of there. DRC, Dick Gorson called me and said, would you come back? I said, what time you guys open? I'll be there. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. But this 91 was really a bad year at TIC, even though they still did 12 or 13 million in revenue.
Well, the whole thing with TIC was the evolution of the AM station post Travelers. And I think the Chases were probably the best suited owners to take over that station, because they did not object to spending money to make more money. And that wasn't forever, but initially when Perry took over the station, they had a big checkbook and they were not afraid to spend it. And it paid off, as you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Perry came from KISS. Remember when he ran KISS before that? WKSS.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because talking Arnold again, he said, I love guerrilla marketing. And he would talk about, like he said, HCN was really sponsoring the Stones coming to town or something. And they were doing ticket giveaways and stuff. He says he got like a bunch of manpower guys to get down there in line and be right up front when the tickets went on sale, gave them all money and just had them buy a ton of tickets so TIC FM could get on and be giving away Stones tickets. And I also kind of rebutted him saying, as great as you guys were, I said creativity was the key. And
that's right.
I said, my dad.
I was going to say, the guy I'm going to give a lot of credit to is Steve Salhaney. Salhaney and I joined the station around the same time, and Salhaney was a futurist. He was thinking in big terms. And I remember in 1990, he went to Arnold And he said, Arnold, I have a promotion I want to do for the summer. Remember the summer of 96,
Yep.
summer. I was the big promotion. He said, well, what do you want to do? He says, I want to give away a car. He said, you want to give away a car? That's very expensive. How will we work it out? He says, we'll buy it. He said, what kind of car do you want to give away? And it was very high at the time, a Mazda Miata. He said, you want to give away a Mazda Miata? He said, yeah, you can buy it. It only costs about $20,000. This is 1990. He said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So we bought the car and we stored it. We bought it in like March, in April, May, because it was a hot car. And he put it in Arnold's garage. He had this, this big house on the mountain with a 5-car garage. He put it in Arnold's garage and it stayed there until we unveiled it. When we unveiled the summer of 96 promotion, which was right around, right after the summer started, at the end of June. And, Sal Haney, he really was a promoter. I mean, he knew how to promote concerts, and the ratings were there. I mean, everybody talked about the TIC in those days.
And of course, here you are with, DRC with absolutely no budget. They hardly ever had anything to spend. And that's when it would fall on my dad, to come up with another contest, something crazier. But the key was audience participation. And that was, I've said this before, but, when they were doing like thousands, I was 96,000. It was some tremendous amount of money they were giving away. And that's when my dad said, can you get me 500 pairs of chinos from Bob's Surplus? And I got Ken Gromback to give me, 500 pairs of chinos. And every hour going up against that, DRC did the spring chino fling, and you zipped your phone, and it would involve zip codes and everything else. So from an Arbitron standpoint, it was really, really good. But again, I know I can win $9 chinos. I can't win the Powerball across the street. So there was a lot of activity that way. And that was it. If you couldn't do creative, forget it. I mean, when it's like when Bill Hines said, when I first, started there and I looked at the combo of DRC, AM, and FM, I said, wow, this is great. He goes, leave the book here. Leave the book here. He says, what are you going to do if the numbers are ever gone? That's when you have to go to spec selling. That's when you got to go to creativity to make it work. But I'll tell you, Arnold still total geek. He was caught up. We have like an old keyboard. It looks like almost like an old, not an organ, but about the size of almost like a little organ you would have in your house. Very tiny, but it's extremely old. And right away, Arnold saw that. It was down the back hallway, and he saw that. He saw one of the tubes we have set up there. And Sal Haney came right in, and we've begged him to buy the radio station back. Yeah. Please. And he's not yet, but even his stories about what he had to go through to get TIC TV and, but because, you have somebody that passionate about the business, that was the biggest difference. Plus, I think Ron,
passion and a big pocketbook.
Yeah, and I think Ron, didn't he hire people and he kind of like let him go? Because I think he was the original PD before he brought in maybe Jay or was it David?
Well, he knew, he knew his shortcomings. I mean, he just because you grew up listening to a radio station doesn't mean you're qualified to run a radio station. So he knew what he had to do. But we would have meetings in those days. We would have these command meetings where we'd have to go to. In those days, Chase's offices were in the Stilts building on Trumbull Street, and we'd have these meetings and go in there, and there'd be Arnold. David Chase was never there. He was like. He was in Poland buying cable TV. He was doing other things. But Arnold would be there. And Roger, I forgot his last name, Arnold's brother-in-law.
Friedman.
Roger Friedman, that's right. And, and there'd be, and Perry and Bob Dunn and the sales managers. It was Jim Simonetti, Kevin Bauer, and myself. And we'd go in there. And they would just beat us to death. Like, what are you guys going to do? How are you going to raise revenue? What's going on? It would just be, it was very, very difficult. But, that's what you had to answer to. There was no, here's the radio station, do what you want, but you better do it right.
What about Arnold Chase? I heard a quote once that said after he sold to American Radio that Arnold Chase said that it was a big mistake. Is that true?
I don't know about that.
Well, I think that because ultimately David Chase, the patriarch of that family, his heart and soul, listen, the guy was a Holocaust survivor. He grew up in Poland. This guy went through hell and back. His lifetime goal was to create a financial presence in Eastern Europe. That's where his roots were from. So he had a chance to create cable television and the banking system in Poland, and that's what he did. And he had to sell. He said, I'm local Connecticut radio. Get rid of that shit. Let's go to Poland." And that's what they did. And Arnold
He
had
would
no
even
say in
say,
it.
That's right.
and Dave Arnold even said the other day, he says he always loved spending 1 week a month in Poland. So he did a lot of stuff over there. But it was interesting because I haven't had too many people that I've ever had to interview in the studio as shy, very low key, very, very careful about every word he said. Very, very, very limited on getting him to speak. But even when we posed for the picture at the end, he asked, "How should I hold my hands? How should I do this?" Doesn't like the spotlight at all. And kind of said, I said, "I'd love to have you in here and talk about the history of the place." And, he
wouldn't do that. He won't do it.
He just does. He's not braggadocious. He said
Not
that
at
he
all.
was so moved when he was being honored by the United Way. But I'm telling you, man, oh, great. I have Arnold Chase in the studio with me. Well, the group that's really bringing this together, it was called the Impact Awards, IMPA and then capital CT. And behind it was Fox 61. So I'm sitting there with the woman from Fox 61 in WTIC radio station, which Arnold had never been in before. I'm giving him a tour of the place, but thinking of all those two things coming together. And it wasn't until I got on and just said, "Shit, let's go for it." Because there were so many notes and everything he was ready for. And at the first break, I looked at him and I said, "So how are we doing?" I did call him Arnold Palmer once. And everybody broke up. I said, maybe we can edit that out of the show because because of schedules, that was the first time we ever had to pre-record the show. And the show will be next Saturday. And it's just interesting to listen to him. But boy, oh boy, I had the chance to introduce him to everybody that was running the radio station. And the only one he really knew in the building was Sal Haney, who ran right down. He'd never met my boss, Janine Lee. And it was kind of neat because you could tell he enjoyed it. But the funniest thing is, geek of all geeks, he said, "Steve, I've really got to go." Because when he was off the air, he talked to Blue Street. He said, "I really got to go." He says, "I got to get the Tractor Supply." He says, "I've got things I've got to pick up for the farm." For the farm. And I said, "Really?" I said, "Where's the farm?" He goes, "Next to my house." It's 50.
You broke up, Steve. You froze up.
While he's unfreezing, I'll throw out another anecdote about another person who was very shy in front of a microphone, and that was DRC's founder, Franklin Doolittle.
Yeah.
I remember Walt Dibble told me that in '72, when they did the big DRC is 50 celebration, that Walt went to Doolittle's house, I think in Hamden, and he consented to do an interview, but he wouldn't let him tape it. And Walt said, "I tried to get him to do a couple of promos that Charlie had written, but he said, I don't want my voice to be on tape." And as far as I know, Doolittle's voice is not recorded anywhere.
That's probably true.
Yeah. Arnold, he bought that mountaintop property, top of Avon Mountain. And I remember when he was constructing his house. It's a very interesting house. It's 50,000 square feet, 25,000 feet above ground, and 25,000 feet below ground. And what Steve said about him being a doomsayer or whatever you call it, he's right. So he created a city underground. And there are two different ways you can get to his property, from Route 44 and then from, I think it's
Deercliff
Road. Deercliff Road. That's right.
Deercliff Road, yeah.
And it's and he also has a lake up there. I mean, it is incredible property. Of course, when your father gives you $100 million when you're 21 years old, not a bad way to go through life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when he was talking about the charitable work they do, again, doesn't like to talk a lot about it, but what he really enjoys is giving back to smaller groups, smaller foundations and stuff. And he said the whole charitable thing came from his dad because when he did get out of the concentration camp, so many people came to his aid financially and helped him get out of there and come over to this country. So he said, that's just inbred. That's always been like that, is making sure that they're giving back.
Beatrice Auerbach Fox was among his big sponsors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
She knew
Yeah,
he
you know,
was.
you think about it, he's one of the he's a legendary broadcaster. If you put him in the perspective of what he's done in terms of broadcasting in the state, Chase ranks right up there.
Oh yeah, and even when they had to pull off doing the whole television thing, there had to be such a separation between the TV and the radio. And when he got it, it was originally called, before it was TIC, it was WETG,
Right.
and that was for Ella Grasso.
Right.
And I think it may have been, he's either, I think it was her husband or his son. Somebody was on the board, and he was really. He was telling me about the mounds of paper and everything he had to go through. This was not an easy thing to be able to get just the call letters and get the station and everything. But, still, committed to it. He has 70 patents right now, 70 patents, and started talking a lot about electric cars in the future. Not a concern at all. I mean, this is a guy who's a geek of a geek. And you have to understand that, whether it's the grid or anything else, he's got a lot of his patent stuff has to do with electric cars too. But
you should present this whole Zoom that we're doing today to TIC for their 100th anniversary.
Yeah.
Got more information here than I'm sure a lot of them know at the station.
Oh yeah, well, the interesting thing is, I interviewed Arnold. I introduced Arnold after the interview to Morgan Cunningham, because Morgan's doing all the historic stuff. What are you holding up there?
Can you see it?
Not quite.
Broadcaster at WTIC Radio at 100, episode 4. Who's the guest?
Me.
Yeah.
I went to the studio in Farmington back in the spring, and I sat down with Morgan Cunningham,
Yep.
who I think is a pretty good, sharp kid, by the way.
Oh, big time.
27.
I can tell you that.
Yeah. And he picked my brain for stuff that I had long forgotten, because he would say something that would trigger a response. And he was just enamored with the fact that I had this recall of all the trivia that I had gone through while I was coming up through the ranks in Connecticut radio. And then when he found out I was Bob Steele's longest serving newsman, that really opened the door. He just said, wow, I never thought of that. I said, well, I didn't either until I looked at a calendar once, and I said, geez, no one else has been Steele's compatriot here in news as long as I have.
How many years?
From 77 part-time and 79 full-time to 96. So over 20 years. Over 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I said to Arnold, I said, you and Morgan really should get together. But Bill Hennessy added a lot when Morgan interviewed him. But and even all you have to do is ask Arnold. He's got everything. You want memorabilia. He's never been to the Vintage Radio Communications Museum, and I'm hoping that I can get to spend an afternoon with him and take a ride up there, because I know he probably has things that he would love to be able to at least let them borrow. But one of the funniest things was Morgan Cunningham was promoting his last Saturday when he was on the air with me. He was promoting his interview. His interview he does. He interviews somebody every week to be on for his program. Morgan would kill me for not getting this.
Face Connecticut?
Yeah. It's what?
Face Connecticut.
Nope. It's close. It's something with Connecticut, but it's not Face Connecticut.
Okay. All right.
But it is something. Oh boy, I'm going to hear about this. But because Morgan's going to be watching this right now, he's going to kill me. But the funny thing is, he was talking he says, it took me 10 years to find this guest. And he, hey, excuse me. He wanted to talk about parodies. Okay. He took him 10 years to find Bob DiCarlo.
Steve left us.
Okay.
Just then the host disappeared.
Guys, the only time I ever listened to WTIC radio growing up in the Hartford area was when a storm was coming. I want to listen to Bob Steele in the morning to find out what's going on and whether our school was closed.
Yeah.
The only other time I listened to WTIC was Arnold Dean's sports talk show, which, of course, I was a big sports fan, so I used to love listening to Arnold. Good guy, and I used to bump into him from time to time at the sporting events. So I love sports radio, and TIC did a good job, I thought.
Well, they had a good job because they had a real sports department.
That's
You
right.
know, between
right.
Scott Gray and Arnold, and there were others.
Greg
and they
Gilmartin.
did all. Yeah,
Greg
exactly.
Gilmartin,
They had a
right.
real sports
Yeah.
department there.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing about, you mentioned is snow cancellations. When TIC was king of that stuff in the morning with the cancellation hitches, there was an effort to share the cancellations with Channel 3 because they didn't have a team. They didn't have a snow team. They didn't have everybody programmed to call a certain number to cancel school. And they said, well, we're gonna let this thing be shared now with Channel 3. I threw a fit. I said, this is the crown jewel of WTIC AM, and you're giving it away? Or you got rocks in your head? I mean, that was lost.
Great point. And then
But-
TV picked up on that, and then
Yeah.
before you knew it, they were
It
doing
was-
the scroll in the morning, and then it was radio lost that significant piece of programming. Right.
Yeah, they do that
best
now
thing-
on they do that now on radio, all news stations. Before they would have the school cancellations, block out about 10 minutes for it in morning drive, and now they say it's all online. Just go to our website
online.
and you'll see it right there.
And the thing was is that there was one morning when we didn't call a storm crew in because the forecast was botched. So we had all the snow coming down in the morning, and Channel 3 was not plugged in because the storm team was not up to set up the computer link with their studio. So all the cancellations went on AM, and anybody who watched TV was SOL because there was not there. So some woman called and 11:30 that morning to complain. I answered the phone in the newsroom, and she said, you know, this is not right because blah, blah, blah. I said, well, the forecast gave us a screw job here, so it's really not Channel 3's fault. But the take-home message here, my dear, is listen to TIC AM and you won't be disappointed. And you know, it's just I tried my damnedest to thwart this thing, and it was of no avail. No.
For those of us who have been radio personalities over the years, I think you could all agree that whenever there's a major storm, like, for instance, the storm of blizzard of 77, remember that?
78, Storm Larry.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was 78. 78. Okay.
But Bob, yep, that wasn't. I think that was the one. Yeah, that was the one that closed the highway, right?
Closed the state. Grasso closed the state.
It closed everything. It closed everything. I was on the air at Big D at the time, and I recall all we did was talk about all of the closures and what's going on, and we had the state police on the air, and we had the governor, and we had the same thing happen here in Vero Beach in Florida when we had back-to-back hurricanes within 3 weeks of each other, Francis and Jean, and it struck right this area. And all we did for days on end, because people really didn't have much power, so they didn't have TVs, so they listened to radio. And I find that, the most satisfaction you could have on the radio is affecting people's lives by giving them what they need at the time that it's most needed. And
That's
so
right.
many people thank me later for keeping them informed and entertained at the same time. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was at DRC during the 78 storm, and not being an on-air personality, we were doing, cancellations. We were grabbing all the phones and getting the cancellations in. Myself, I think Jim English there, and we stayed like 2 days there. I brought a change of clothes with me, and because I knew a storm was coming, I figured we might get locked in rather. And it was amazing. Corson called at about 11 o'clock at night, and I answered the phone, and he says, "You're still there?" I says, "Yeah, we're still taking information. He says, "You guys are doing a great job." And And it was 2 days. I finally went home, and it was an experience. It was a fun experience because we were part of history.
Yeah. And that's where the team would always come together. Dave Nagel, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was in a similar situation in Norwich at ICH and CTY. There were 5 of us who worked around the clock, live on AM, and we'd switch over to the FM, ICH and CTY back in those days. And I mean, Jimmy Reed was there, a few other people were there, but it was an amazing experience because you knew you were being depended on by the community. And one of the most amazing feelings I've ever had was, I'm actually I felt like I made a difference in trying to get living in
I was living in I was living in Stratford, Connecticut at the time, and so they closed Connecticut, but I was working in New York, and they didn't close New York, so I was caught between a rock and a hard place. I ended up having to stay in Stratford because if you went out on the roads, they'd arrest you. Not that I could have gone very far because I lived in the north side of town out by Sikorsky. And I mean, it was the last place they plowed, and we must have had, 7 feet of snow.
That's right.
But I mean, I was stuck. They had to cover. One other time I got stuck in snow going into New York. I don't know whether you guys are familiar with Mott Haven in the Bronx.
Yes.
I got stuck. The train literally got stuck in snow there. We were there for like 8 hours. I mean, I missed my show, and they didn't have cell phones. The guy, the engineer, had to call for me, the dispatcher, who then called the station to say, "Your guy's on the train."
Yeah, and something that I'll tell you, and I bet you, Ron, you can attest to this. That storm probably sold more freaking Jeeps for Lippman Motors. Because I was in the middle of that storm.
Brad,
I was stuck. I actually did. I was working maintenance at the mall, and I was told to go out and get because we were working overnight and everything, obviously trying to keep things going, even though the mall was closed. They had to keep the place plowed and everything. And I was told to go get our one of our managers who lived over Parkview West over in Hartford, and I was driving the plow, and it was a Ford F-250. And I'm going through, not a problem at all, because I got the plow. Except there was a a 73 Mercury Montego that was buried in the snowdrift. Well, that was the end of that car, and I went. And also, it had me sitting there, and there was a state trooper following me to actually with a tow truck to get that. Let me tell you something. You want to talk about getting arrested? This guy tried to kill me, and even when it went back to the mall. They said, Steve, they said, we were wrong to send you out there to get him, but they said, this guy really wants you bad.
I got sworn that was a big drift.
But I will say while I was sitting there in the snow, I don't know how many times Brad was talking up the Jeep and talking up not just him, but encouraging everyone with 4-wheel drive to go get the frontline workers, nurses and everything else, and bring them in.
I remember that.
Yeah, I remember it at DRC. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. We ordered a pizza from down the street, and the guy delivered it. He brought like 4 different pizzas, delivered it to us. He walked from the pizza place here, and we knocked on the door. So who the heck is that? And there's the guy with the big pizza. We brought him in. He spent about an hour there, just looking around, and I forgot who was on the air. I forget who was on the air at that time. It was that night. And I know it was John Lane, not John, John Larrabee. Yeah,
John Larrabee.
But we had the pizzas. He didn't want money. He says, no, he says, these are on us. So Jim English went in the library, brought out a stack of albums. And he says, here, take them. And he was as happy as can be, walked out in the snow and went back to the place. And here we had pizza. That was,
and that was, I think Arnold was said also, he says he's one of the guys that's fighting viciously to keep the AM radios in cars. And because of these things that we're saying, because when it all hits the fan, folks, still, I mean, people, maybe it's because these generations right now, 1 or 2 generations behind us haven't really seen that power. But I will tell you, like when when the Halloween storm happened, when Storm Sandy happened, when all the big storms hit, you better believe. And I mean, I got called in one of the storms because of the fact they said, Steve, we want to go back to doing what WTIC is known for doing. And that was, you know, bringing in people that weren't necessarily connected with some of the other programs that they do. And I think it was me and their executive producer. But that's where they would still turn. And I mean, Roland was in there at that point in time doing his program. And they were holding him over like mad. But you know, I don't know what will happen when, if, and it could happen, the AM band is gone from car radios.
Well, it's already starting. Volvo. I have a Volvo, and there's no AM radio in that car.
Yeah.
Well, I know the industry is using as a sell line about this to Congress about how we have to have AM radio because it's always there in times of emergency. But that really is a false argument because at many of the smaller AM stations, there is no staff. There is nobody to call in that knows how to turn on a microphone. You've got a hard drive running your radio station, and
by the way, most of them are Hispanic.
Exactly.
Turns out.
Yeah.
And EAS is on satellite radio. It comes through your phone. If there's an emergency, my watch goes crazy. Forget my phone and everything, and you know, you get it everywhere. So, you know, there's an argument.
Oh yeah, Arnie has most of that stuff at his house. He said even when he had the station, he always had stuff set up at his house where if they were off the air, he says in his bathroom if they were off the air for 1 second, you know. And that was, I have to admit, I have a producer on Saturday morning. I love her with all my heart. The problem right now is you have to be so careful when you have someone working with you that you don't let them have it if something goes wrong. You have to know politically, right? Because that person will walk. And that's how people. One guy came in and took a job as one of our producers. He left. He didn't agree with the program content. You're like, what? So at one point, I just have to shut up because I hold myself back from flipping out.
That's hard for you.
Oh yeah, but you know, things like at one point she says, "Well, I how many times she'll miss a cue?" And I love her. I'm going, I don't care. You can't miss that. And while I was putting up the podcast, I said, you know something? I don't give a shit if the podcasts ever get up. I need you to be with me as my partner on the show every second. And last week, we missed something, cue or whatever. She says, "Oh, it was just a second." Oh, and I'm on the air going, oh, shit. And again, you know, but it's unfortunate. We have, I don't know how many hours it is right now where there's nobody in that entire building. Nobody in that whole building of 4 radio stations. Empty, blank.
You know, but that's an attitude, Steve, with radio altogether right now. I mean, we used to value production. When we did a show, you know, when we had our turntables or cart machines and ran everything ourselves, there was no automation. We were tighter. We were more into the program. Nowadays, there's this lackadaisical attitude out there that, what the hell, you know? Oh, you missed a show? Missed a break? No problem. We'll make it up some other time. We'll tell the guys in sales.
I don't know if you guys, how much you listen to NPR, and I listen to it quite a bit. It is amazing to me. When I grew up in radio, dead air was death.
Oh yeah.
No dead air.
Oh, I could have sold that time.
You get a phone call.
You listen to Republic Radio, NPR now, and it's like, you know, in these shows, there's 5-6 seconds all the time of dead air. Like, wow, they still on? Like, it's amazing how that's changed.
Yep.
Stop me if I told you.
I'll hear that in the middle of a talk show while the host is talking.
Hey, Charlie would call us.
Yeah.
Your dad would call us. What was that dead air?
Yep.
You know,
never had the radio off. But you know, it's just terrible. Even with production, you know, Dave was a stickler to make sure that the production was done exactly right to perfection, no matter what the copy was or anything else. Everything had to be timed out beautifully. I mean, the music had to come in at the right time, whether it was sound effects or anything else. I mean, he was very supportive when I would be cutting all these spec spots. But I don't know how many times I've heard close enough production. Like what?
You know, I think the audiences today are immune to things like dead air and dropouts. It's all part of cyberspace is and what radio and TV and cable is all about.
How many times have you heard, like on a weekend, you'll hear the automation will kick in a spot, and then something else will kick in at the same time, and you're saying, okay, the engineer's got to hear this. He's got to stop one of them, right? And then never
Doesn't
happens.
stop.
You listen.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
listen for 60 seconds to two things running at the same time.
Yep.
I have a couple
Let
of
me-
shows that are on Sunday afternoon that are already pre-recorded, but they're on HD and they're on the stream. And there have been one or two times where the wrong hour has aired. You know, instead of the 3 o'clock hour, it's the 4 o'clock hour. And I said, what the hell is going on? Well, you know, it's the function of the computer or the automated system for that.
Yeah.
So the hell, you know.
And they accept it though. That's the, you know, it's like, yeah, that's okay.
Yep.
Stop me
Yeah.
if I told you this story before. When my daughter when my daughter graduated college, she bought a 86 Nissan Pulsar with the T-tops. It was fire engine red. It was a perfect car for a young woman out of college. About a week later, I got into it for the first time. We were going down to town to drop dry cleaning off or someplace in Waterbury. We lived on East Mountain, which is almost into Prospect, which is very high. I said, well, stay here for a minute. I want to see what's going on with your FM radio. So I started scanning the dial. I pulled in SRS in Worcester, stations from Poughkeepsie, everything up north in Western Mass. I said, pretty good sensitivity on this radio. Then I switched to the AM band. It's dead. No static, no noise, no audio, no nothing. She didn't know it.
Yeah.
Really?
I told that story to Bob Dunn. He freaked out. It was like I set a stake through his heart. He says, I tell that story at conferences and everybody shrieks, but they don't have a response for it. They just cringe.
Is that when you disinherited your daughter? Is that?
No. Hey, look, she grew up with FM. That was it. And that's all she
exactly
cared
right.
about. That's all she
I
cared about.
drive down to
And-
Florida, and certain towns, you know, try to listening to the AM because I either want to listen at that time is listen to Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, and you know, in the beginning you could get it on 4 different stations, leave one area, pick it up on another area,
Right.
and you
Right.
almost listened to it all the way down to Florida. Now you can't. You know, I mean, I'll hear Sean Hannity out of
Rush
Florida.
is dead, Dave. Rush is dead. You wouldn't be able to hear his show.
Well, look at all the stations like TIC who took Rush Limbaugh and Dr. Laura before, because she was on from 10 to 12 initially, and Limbaugh would come on, and his audience, of course, was loyal as hell. But the trouble with Limbaugh was that he chased your core audience away, and they didn't come back until the next morning. So all these stations that had full service stations that had Limbaugh suddenly had an afternoon drive that was worth shit.
Yep. And you
And-
know, Brian, exactly what you're saying, Brian, because we had Rush for 2 years before TIC got it. TIC wanted it bad. We wouldn't give it up. And after 2 years, we saw that Rush kind of leveled out. But right away, from a sales standpoint, when we added a Rush, when we added controversial talk, we burned that qualitative. I mean, CEOs gone, lawyers gone, doctors gone. And all of a sudden our ratings were up, but I could talk to advertisers who would still say nothing ever brought them results of WPOP when they did news radio and kept it news. And I think, unfortunately, sales in a lot of these stations, when you're talking with a group of people that are, you know, younger than some of the baby boomers, they don't see it. They don't get it. So until they wrap their mind around the fact of the qualitative and the importance of that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't sell it. I mean, when I actually, after I quit, they wanted me to stay and at POP because I really was probably the only one left in sales in the building that knew the value of 1410. And
Just think of how good it did during the Iranian hostage crisis. Joanne Nesty was there, Jerry Brooks was there, I was there, David Melendi. We had a stable of stars in Connecticut news.
at
Dave Melindy,
POP.
wow.
And
Hmm.
we had like an 8 share for that crab's ass signal. What do you want? You couldn't do any better. And that was one of the things that really defined radio, when there was something of import, such as the crisis, to give people a reason to listen, other than just to get the weather or hear who screwed somebody else on the streets of Hartford the night before. This gave all genres of listeners an excuse, a reason to listen to AM radio. And
Brian, you mentioned David Melindy. I remember him very well. Whatever happened to him?
Washington, D.C.
No, he died recently.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry to hear that.
He had prostate
He passed
cancer.
away?
Yeah,
Oh,
prostate
sorry.
cancer. He had an aggressive form of prostate cancer. In fact, he had it just when I was retiring in 2012. He pulled me aside once and he said, I have prostate disease. And he said, it's in remission right now, but I have the aggressive form. And by the time Irene and I came up to New Hampshire in 2013, he was beginning to fade, and he didn't last much longer.
Didn't he
Yeah,
go to
he was a
Washington,
really good
D.C.
guy.
after TIC?
Yeah, I went to AP Radio right after TIC. Yeah.
That's where he went. Yeah. He was very good friends with Rob Branham, by the way.
Yep.
Rob
Oh,
and
yeah.
him were very
Oh,
close.
yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great
Didn't
guy.
Ron, somebody was just saying, maybe it was you, Ron, about the billing on TOP in DC was one of the biggest in the country. That
Yeah, it's still.
Yeah.
I think they still is. And then I was
It
going to
is.
say Chase owned that station for several years.
Yeah.
And back in the early 90s, I remember the general manager coming up to Hartford with Bob Dunn. Bob Dunn's walking around because he wanted to learn. He wanted to figure out, how are you guys so dominant in Connecticut? And TOP was I think it was an all new station at that point. The AM, I don't know what the FM was doing. I think that, but I'm pretty sure Chase owned that for a while.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Not long, but they did.
Yeah.
Of course, WTOP was in a city built for all news. I mean, the nation's capital.
Yeah,
You can't
absolutely.
be successful with news
Right.
there. But wasn't
For sure.
TOP a 5,000 watt station?
50. They were a 50.
They were
but
50?
But it had a crab's ass pattern. It was just like TOP. There were sections of the DC metro area where you couldn't hear it. And I don't know if they were a DA or a DA1 or a DA2, who knows. There was they had more than one tower, so it had to be some sort of directional array.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what it was. All I knew is that you couldn't get it everywhere.
You know, there's so much. When we were at POP back then, and POP was really, other than AJ Austin, which was nice because AJ really had a great way of keeping it local during the day, but always news was always what led everything. But POP really had a staff that was hungry and on the street, and they would really scoop TIC all the time. Because when TIC was pulling back on it, we were aggressive. And I mean, I was always so proud of our reporters because they would kick ass. And I think what happened was stations like that should have been stations that really had no money, smaller stations, should have been bringing in, the next wannabe reporters. I mean, that's what you want. Al Jones was with us at POP and went into the city. It's huge, but having them not concerned about the money they were being paid, but go out and make a name for yourself. Get up there. Get pushed around. Don't be afraid of anybody. Now, I don't know, Judge. Judge, were you there when POP started to get into news or no?
I was in sales at the when they made the transition.
What was that like?
It was sales was very very difficult when we first went all news because the concept was so new in Hartford. You would go in and try to sell it, talk to clients, and it was unknown to them. But you don't play any music. You don't no. It's all news. It's 24 hours a day, and it was a difficult sell, which is one of the reasons I left. I left after about 6 months, went over to CCC, and was selling over there.
Yeah, I mean it's very difficult if you're not passionate about the product. When you look at Ron and Rob Branham and so many other people that myself, that was passionate for radio. It wasn't being about passionate. A lot of guys, unfortunately, men and women, and you need them, just like, you know, good used car salesmen. A lot of them were driven by the dollar and would do anything they had to do to get any kind of advertiser on there. You know, I mean, and actually Arnold Chase did tell the story there about the hemorrhoid stuff, right, Ron? Yeah. Yeah, about Preparation H, making sure that those spots didn't air.
Didn't get on the air. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was at TIC, Jim Esposito called me, and he said, and he was the general manager of POP in those days, and Bob Lang was the sales manager, and they tried to recruit me to come over to POP. And I remember they were telling me, says, you know, here at POP, you can sell 10 spots for the cost of 1 spot on TIC FM. And I said, okay, I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah.
And I didn't end up going. I ended up going back to DRC not long afterwards. But yeah, it's funny. I remember, it's funny the things that you think about, you know, how things have changed, you know, and what it was like back then.
But again, these are people that cared so much about it and had so much respect for it, especially, you know, when you I mean, I worked every part of the business because I'd rather be in any part other than not being in there. And sales side was a place where, in my position, always proud to be Charlie Parker's son. I still always will be, and you can tell. And I always love when people would accidentally even call me Charlie. But the only way I was going to be able to make it was because this guy here with the Yankees cap on believed in me enough when I had long hair, fry boots, and everything else. And
now, the definitive moment for you in my life was the Steve Martin lookalike contest. I watched you get up. I watched you get up in front on the Russian lady and basically take over that audience and command respect and quiet and order. And I'm Steve. I remember the next day I went to the father's office. I said, "When can you get Steve in here?" He was phenomenal last night.
And I'm like, great. There's no way I want to go. I didn't want to give him a good job at the mall.
Steve, I will never forget that what you did that night, and you look good too. You had long hair, it was blonde in those days, and you had the white suit on, and you were. I said, "This kid is great."
I borrowed the suit for the interview. I really did. I borrowed the suit. But the funny thing is, it was really the only way that I could go out and show people. Like, again, you know, to be in that building and be with my dad was the best, those 4 years. But actually to go out there and bring in dough just because I had to do that. Couldn't take dad the car with me, you know. So it was pretty much, you know, it was pretty much.
I remember, and I know I've said this before, but you would go out and you would with your personality and the way you are, which is great. And you would go, I just remember those apartment complexes. You would come back with it. He'd hand me a check, would be like $30,000. They said, this is in the 70s, late 80s, late 70s.
A lot of money.
How are they spending this much money, Steve? He says, I don't know. They just want to run a lot of spots. They loved you. And it was not ratings. And what was the name of that place? Something
It was Weathersfield Gardens, Franklin Gardens. They were
that
like,
was it.
Like converted apartments into condos. Larry Fishman. And
yes, I used to bring back money that we couldn't remember. I would look at Byron and I said, how is he doing this?
you spend 3 hours with the man that owns the complex, listen to every story in the world about Fort Lee and all the great. He was a real New Yorker. And I would just listen, and he'd always end up by giving me a check. And that was what it really came down to, you know, was the fact that he felt comfortable. I'll tell you something though. He was taking African Americans and he was taking Puerto Ricans and he was driving them out of their apartments to turn them into condos. And the muscle of what he did was a local guy named Sal, an Italian guy. And Sal would just, you know, back him all the way. So one day I caught up with Sal. I said, "So where's Larry?" He says, "Didn't you hear? His wife shot him." But he survived. But you know something, at the end of the day, it was always fun. You could always count on people to make you feel like, even if you had a shitty day, that it was good. And it was the same thing. It's who's down the hall. It was having Ron there. It was having Al Pellegrino at POP. It was having people that really, really supported you no matter what you did. And
did you remember the Feed a Friend Food-a-thon the DRC had?
Yes.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Who could do that? Now this was It was all at West Farms Mall. It was a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. I was there. Half the news staff was there. All the jocks were there, and Bill Coleman was on the air, and people were dumping money into this bucket in front of the trailer where we were, just to say, I think this is a good deal, and I need to give this money because it'll make me feel good and it'll help someone who's in need. Midway through the whole thing, Pellegrino, who was, and POP was still rock at that time, Pellegrino put a thing on the air endorsing the Feed a Friend Foodathon. I never heard anything like it, like in my life like that. He said, we compete for everything, but some things rise above that. This is one of those things.
And that's probably one of the reasons when I left DRC and my dad wasn't coming back, I said, where should I go? He says, Al Pellegrino. And that was, competing sometimes, but good respect and friendships. But I will say, that was the edited version. That was because my dad had heard that the Postal Service might go on strike. How are people going to get their welfare checks? How are they going to feed themselves? And Dave, what happened in his office?
We were sitting there and we were, talking about it, and somebody made a comment like about a bank or something, and I was joking and I said, yeah, I says, let me deposit these can of corn and I'll withdraw, 6 cans of corns of beans. And we were laughing, and your father's sitting there thinking, he says, that's it. He says, want to have a bank. Bank? What are you gonna, a food bank? Yeah. And so then it was like last minute, got a hold of Wayne. Mulligan came in, hooked up a remote at West Farms, because this was like we were on a Tuesday talking about this. Yeah. And Wayne set up a remote at West Farms, and Charlie was expecting maybe if we got 20,000 canned good items, that'd be good. It'd be a success, and maybe $5,000. Well, we wound up with 72,000 canned good items, and I think almost $20,000 in cash, and huge success. And then the day that weekend, Ryan, if you remember, temperatures were in the upper 60, almost 70 degrees. That's so everybody was trying to get out, and they were in their motorcycles and everybody dropping off stuff there. Now we tried to do it again in October. It flopped. It died.
Yeah, it was a once thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't that. People weren't in the mood of giving because they were out raking their leaves, attending the high school football games. It was the last thing they were going to talk about was think about getting food. And your father, Steve's dad, was quite upset. And then he realized, he says, these people had other things to do. So I said, excuse me. Then I said, well, run it at Christmas time. Everybody's in the giving mood. And he says, yeah. And that's when we set up the remote at Silver Lane Plaza in East Hartford, and we did that. We did that remote for.
Ryan, you mentioned Bill Coleman a little while ago. Everybody, whatever became of him? Anybody ever hear from him? He became a lawyer down in Florida.
Yeah, not what I hear.
Heard anything about him or from him? Or
well, it's Ed Mitchell, Ed Scarborough, Ed Lieblich, the man of many names. He seemed to have had some kind of a run-in with him. And in one of the previous shows that Ed appeared here on the Zoom call, he alluded to, he had the whole story, but we never got it in the call. So I'm not sure what happened.
Well, he apparently, he was never a lawyer. If he did, he pretended he was one, and got into a situation down in Florida. And to make a long story short, he did some time, like 6 months in jail. And then after that, he was like out of sight, out of mind.
Really?
Yeah.
Was Coleman his real name, or was it Neil because he used the different names of DRC and POP?
Dugatkin.
Dugatkin, yeah.
Dugatkin. Dugatkin.
Yeah.
I think he drove a Corvette.
Yes.
And I believe it was a brown Corvette. That kind of said a lot right there.
Yeah. He Bill and I, we got to know each other when he was at DRC. He was Bill Neal there. And we played tennis together, and he was a nice guy, but there was an edge to him.
yeah.
A lot of the guys didn't, didn't warm up to him. I warmed up to him, and a lot of people warmed up to me because I was, able to give them money when they cut spots. And so I was money in their pocket. But yeah, Bill and I played tennis. We did a lot of tennis. And then when he left DRC, I don't know where he went after that.
I think he went
But
to
I
Philly.
heard-
I think he came down to Philly.
Yeah,
He
I
was at
think
WIP,
okay.
which I think
Yeah.
is where he first ran into Ed Mitchell.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's the story of Bill Neal, alias Bill Coleman, Bill Dugakin.
right, right.
All right. Well, I tell you guys, this has been another really good one. Anybody have anything to add before we check out of here?
We
See you
said
next
it
week.
all. We've said it all.
All right. Well, you guys are wonderful again. And we're going to hopefully catch you next week, which will be Friday, August 30th.
Right.
As we get out there, everybody enjoy the summer while we can. We've got a beautiful day here. Hopefully you guys are enjoying some good weather wherever you're at, and have a great weekend. And for the August 23rd, 2024 edition of Radio Friends Again, I'm Steve Parker, and thanks to all of our guests. I've been trying to keep your names up there from time to time during the show. And again, please support the Broadcasters Foundation of America. We got, even right now, I spoke with Sandy Beach this week and Jack Miller this week. They're both going through some serious health problems. So keep thoughts and prayers out with anybody who's dealing with that. Keep Walt in your prayers for everything he's going through. But the Broadcasters Foundation is there if you need help with anything, just need somebody to talk to or some financial help even. You can apply for it through there. So, okay, so we'll catch you next time.
Your friends, radio friends again. Radio friends again. We've got a lot to share.